It has taken more time to move from the north of Athens here than to come from Sydney to Athens. Is it really urban climatic change and the problem of local, let's say, overheating a serious problem? Yes, it is. Actually, there are about 13,000 overheating cities. There are 1.7 billion people which live under very severe overheating conditions. Since the 80s, the number of overheating hours in the world has increased by a factor of 3. We have about 118 billion overheating hours. And the most important is, during the last 10 years, in China and in India, the heat waves exposure increased by 508 million person days per year during the last 10 years. So you understand the magnitude of the overheating really in the world during the very last years. Actually, about 9% of the world population, which is close to 600 million, lives outside the climatic conditions that have sustained human life activities. 9% of the global, let's say, population lives under conditions that we never had in the past. Overheating has a very serious impact. It increases the energy consumption for cooling, and the penalty per person is close to 400 kilowatt hours per square meter and per person. Increase the peak electricity demand and oblige utilities to build additional power plants, and this increases tremendously the cost of electricity. It decreases the efficiency of the power plants, and at the same time, it creates serious problems with blackouts. Unfortunately, yesterday, we had the most serious blackout in Europe, in the history of Europe, with, let's say, about 1 day, almost 1 full day in Spain, Portugal, and part of France without electricity. In United States, during, let's say, the last years and since 2015, the number of blackouts has increased by 151%. This is very important. During the very last years, during a very important blackout, for example, in June 2021 in the United States, we had about 600 additional deaths, 3,500 emergency hospital visits, and tens of thousands of people without electricity. The problem of blackouts is going to be one of the major problems in the future. Apart of the energy problem, we face a serious, let's say, environmental problem. Unfortunately, because of the higher temperature, the concentration of ozone, which is a toxic gas, is increasing tremendously. Actually, we have, according to the World Health Organization, about 420,000 deaths, additional deaths per year because of the ozone. About 96% of the world cities present much higher concentration of ozone in the world. Recently, there was a report from China showing that 150, let's say, cities, the most important cities, exceed the threshold of ozone by about 150%. I remind you that this is a toxic gas that really kills human beings. At the same time, because of the higher, let's say, operation of the power plants, we have a tremendous increase of, let's say, waste heat, and at the same time of pollutants emitted, let's say, by the power plants. For each degree of temperature increase, the increase of the emissions is increasing by about, let's say, 3.5%. So imagine that a day with 10 let's say, degrees of temperature increase during a heat wave, we have 35% more emissions. However, apart of the energy and environmental impact, the major, let's say, impact has to do with the low-income population. Unfortunately, low-income population is living in houses of low quality. Also, is living in areas of much higher, let's say, overheating. As a result of these conditions, indoor temperature in low-income housing is extremely high. Thousands of measurements in Europe, Australia, Asia, everywhere shows that during, let's say, heat waves, indoor temperature in low-income housing exceeds 40 degrees or 45 degrees for 2, 3, or 4 days. And at the same time, indoor pollution, because people is closing, let's say, doors, everything, really to support, let's say, indoor conditions, the indoor pollution is 4 times higher than, let's say, the threshold. A part of it, vulnerable population has not really the means to buy, let's say, the proper energy. According to a recent report of the European Parliament, the low-income population in Portugal, a country of the European Union, is covering only 2% of their cooling needs. At the same time, because, let's say, of the lower income, results from 175 cities in United States, which correlates really the magnitude of the overheating against social and demographic characteristics, show that immigrants, blacks and Hispanic population, and in general vulnerable groups, live in urban zones presenting a much higher overheating. So low-income population is living in areas with much higher overheating. And this really reflects to the quality of life. For example, heat-related mortality in low-income population below 22 years is 3.72%, while for the high-income population is almost 2%. So there is a very serious penalty really because of, let's say, the overheating. Another very important, let's say, example of that is that in New York, the population, the black population, the white population is almost 50-50, is equal. The mortality of, let's say, black population is about the double than the mortality. Thank you so much. Thank you. The mortality of the black population is almost 220% higher than the mortality of, let's say, the white population. However, one of the major issues that has to do with overheating, it is related to health. And we know very well, actually, that because of the overheating, about, let's say, the mortality of population living in the areas, overheating areas of cities, is by 6% higher all around the world than, let's say, the rest of the city. And this data covers only the developed countries because we don't have enough, let's say, data from the developing countries. And another important metric that really is very alarming is that in Europe, heat-related mortality for people above 65 years old between 2004 and 2021 per year has increased by 85%. This is extremely high. And according to the World Health Organization, the magnitude of the heat-related mortality in the world is close to, let's say, 1,000 people per year. So we are losing 500,000 people per year because of the overheating. And unfortunately, forecasts for the future shows that in specific parts of the world, we may expect a tremendous mortality. You see, for example, in Southeast Asia, that we expect a tremendous, really, increase of the mortality because of the overheating. And this is not really the, let's say, forecast of one scientist. This is the official forecast for the World Health Organization. Unfortunately, something which is hidden and is not really well understood is that overheating is creating a tremendous problem of mental health. During the period of high temperature, schizophrenia and the mood disorders increases tremendously. And you can see, for example, the recent examples from all over the world. While actually the budget for mental health is all around the world is close to 2 billion per year, it is expected by 2050 this will increase to 50 billion per year. This is a very serious problem, and unfortunately this is very much combined with the tremendous increase of the suicide rate because of the overheating. For example, in the United States, for each degree above 28 degrees, suicide rate is increasing by 0.7%, while in Mexico is increasing by 2.1%. 2.1% per degree of temperature increase is tremendous. Another important study from Australia shown that in Australia, a developed really country, the increase of the suicide rate of young population above 28 degrees is 1.5% per, let's say, decrease of temperature increase. Another important issue that is not well understood is that because of the higher temperature, the cognitive performance of young population is decreasing tremendously. And higher temperature affects the cognitive performance of people for the next 4 years. For 4 years, when we are exposed to higher temperature, we decrease our, let's say, cognitive performance. Actually, in the United States, Black population and Hispanic population and vulnerable population present, because of the overheating and because of the quality of schools, they don't have air conditioning, etc., they are losing about 6% of their cognitive performance because really of the overheating. And official estimations from United States shows that if really they don't improve the quality of the school, they may lose about 9% of their cognitive performance by 2050. The other important thing, it has to do with the loss of the working hours. Because the temperature, is increasing, people working outdoors really has much lower performance. Recently, during the heat wave, the big heat wave in India, according to the official data of the Indian government, 90% of the population working outdoors was impossible to walk. Officially in the United States, they are losing 100 billion per year from heat-induced loss of labor productivity. And also this affects very much, let's say, their increase in their development rate. Forecast for the future about the loss of, let's say, working hours shows really tremendous numbers. And this is a very serious impact, let's say, for the economy in the future. Another important issue, it has to do with the human productivity. Human productivity is decreasing above, let's say, 30 degrees, and we are losing about 6% of their, let's say, capacity to produce when temperature is close to 36 degrees. And these are results coming from millions, let's say, of experiments all around the world. So actually, overheating affects very much the global economy. But who is affected really the most from the overheating? The low-income population. Actually, in the world, we have the low-income population faces about, let's say, 83 days per year above 35 degrees, while the high-income population faces only 16. And this tremendous, let's say, discrepancy is increasing as the temperature is increasing. And this affects very much energy. How it affects energy? Because we're using more air conditioning. While air conditioning is representing now about 12% of the total energy consumption, it is expected by 2050 that the energy consumption for cooling will increase by about 2,000%. And of course, this will have a tremendous impact on, let's say, the energy budget of the countries. Just to tell you that by 2050, forecast shows that the energy consumption of one single Indian city, Mumbai, will be higher than the total electricity consumption of the United States. And of course, this creates a tremendous problem for the developing countries. Actually, the energy consumption or the peak electricity demand in India is increasing by 15.2% per year. There is no country that can afford an increase of the peak electricity demand 15.2 per year, which means 15% more stations per year. It is impossible really to face such a problem. As a result, actually in India, and especially during the period of higher temperatures, electricity is provided for no more than 4 or 5 hours per day. You understand the tremendous problem not only because of the lack of electricity, but because of the new investments, because of the type really of fuel that has to be used, because of the emissions, because of the pollution and all these things. And when really we solve the problem of electricity, which cannot be solved easily, who can benefit from the air conditioning? Who has air conditioning? Only the high-income population. Results actually from 4 developing countries, Brazil, Mexico, India, Indonesia, and the different bars shows really the penetration of air conditioning in the different income groups. You see that in the low-income groups, you don't have air conditioning. They have 2%, for example, in Indonesia or in Mexico, air conditioning. So this means that actually about 2.5 billion people is living under tremendous overheating. We never had it before without having air conditioning. And this will increase tremendously. So it is not a problem that really affects from the technological point of view our society. It has a tremendous social impact. These are the bad news. I'm sorry about really so many bad news. Do we have good news? Yes. During the last 10-15 years, there's a tremendous research that really has been carried out all around the world, but mainly in the developed countries, trying really to decrease the temperature of cities. We have developed new heat mitigation technologies, like, for example, the photonic materials, will present about 15 degrees lower surface temperature than the ambient one. So imagine that when temperature is 40 degrees outdoors, under the sun, these materials present 25 degrees, which means that they are natural air conditioning. And these materials may present up to 5 degrees lower surface temperature than conventional white. So when these materials are used, for example, you see the results of the application, the implementation in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, that we done it recently, we may decrease the peak temperature of cities up to 4.55 degrees. And this means that we can really decrease the energy consumption, and this is happening in Riyadh, by 35% in a city like Riyadh, which is so much overheated. But the most important is that these materials, which are very cheap materials, when implemented in low-income housing, may decrease the peak, let's say, indoor temperature by 10 degrees. And these are experimental data from, let's say, the Aboriginal housing in Australia. So instead of having people living in 40 degrees, we may, let's say, easily decrease indoor temperature by 10 degrees, and so we can bring it down to 30 degrees and offer them a better quality of life. I like to conclude by saying that there are many forecasts about the future. There are many discussions. As Lucas said before, many people, actually, decision makers, they say that there is no climatic change. I like really to recall the letter of the president of NASA in Nature, the very well-known, let's say, scientific journal, which says the following: since April 2023, there is a tremendous overheating in specific parts of let's say, the globe. While the rate of the overheating was 0.2 degrees per decade, during the last 4 years, we had 0.2 degrees per year. And according to the letter of the president of NASA, we are, let's say, walking in uncharted waters. So unfortunately, this is what is happening. If you follow what is happening during the very last years in Southeast Asia, you will be really terrified. 158 days in Bangladesh above 36 degrees, without really the proper capacity and the proper electricity network and, let's say, facilities to support people. Do we have solutions? Technology is not enough. We have technological solutions, but technology is not enough. We need to have the proper political and economic tools in order to face the problem of overheating. And this means that really we have to monetize the cost of overheating. Those that they increase the temperature, they have to pay. And they have to pay the cost, because the cost is tremendous. On the contrary, those that they decrease the temperature in cities, they need to have benefits. They need really to gain because they decrease the temperature. So we have to create an economic tool, an economic frame through which really we may decrease the overheating. Together with technology, we can really have some hopes for the future. And I like to finalize by saying that actually world cities are really seriously overheated. 16,000 cities present much higher temperature. But we have very important scientific knowledge how really to decrease the temperature. However, this is not really well understood by the decision makers. And they try really to apply and implement in cities some very simple, not sophisticated solutions which do not really help very much. It's a type of a green embellishment. Let's plant some trees. This does not really help anymore. Perhaps 20 years ago, this solution could be, let's say, a proper solution. It's not anymore a solution. Lack of efficient, really mitigation problems increases the magnitude of the problem, the strength of the problem. It aggravates the problem. And trying really to face the problem, we have to understand that it's not just a technological problem. It is a multidisciplinary problem. It is a problem that needs really an integrated and holistic approach where all the disciplines and all really those that they work in the urban environment have to contribute in an holistic policy really in order to solve the problem of overheating. Thank you so much.